Saturday conversation. It's a good time to talk to Tom and Brian. For me, at least, we do this on a daily basis on our staff. But welcome. I want to thank our sponsor, Purdue Union Club Hotel, and they have been sponsors of a lot of our Zoomcasts through the pandemic and been really supportive of what we're doing, and we appreciate them very much. Also, we want to remind folks that you can get a free 40-day free trial to our site. And I'm going to embarrass Brian, but if you want to subscribe for one thing alone, read Brian's upon further review of the Indiana game. You got to be a premium subscriber to do it. It's worth it. But we appreciate those that will consider that. We've been fortunate over the pandemic to have great support from our subscribers, but you can go to GoldandBlack.com, and almost any story, we have a link to a free 40-day trial. So now that I've embarrassed Brian, I'll start with Brian. And you know, obviously, from a Purdue fan's perspective, all wins over Indiana are good. You've won 8 in a row there. This team, Purdue, trending in a direction that really seems positive. Tomorrow, Sunday, 1 o'clock, Penn State, presumably, and I think they're going to be there to play. But an interesting game because Penn State hasn't played very much, and I know they're a vastly different team than the Lions were last year, but they just throttled Purdue last year in Mackey Arena right before the pandemic. But talk about some of what you might see tomorrow in that game, but also maybe where you think, you know, have the Boilermakers arrived, or is this just a continual work in progress?
I think Purdue's getting closer. I think one thing that, you know, I hesitate to necessarily bring up is that one thing about the Indiana win is I don't know how good Indiana is. You know, I didn't think they were great last year. They managed to win enough games to be in the NCAA tournament mix probably, but they've just got real limitations. Their guard play is so limited. Their personnel offensively around Trace Jackson Davis is just very limited. I don't know if they really do anything schematically or to set themselves apart at both ends of the floor. I don't know how much of a problem they really are to prepare for, to be honest with you. And I'm not saying that to, you know, kind of pile on Indiana. I'm just saying that's kind of the reality of it. And a way I think people ought to look at the Purdue win is, even though it's a blast for Purdue people to win in Bloomington, and it's never easy to win in Bloomington, I don't think that was a great team Purdue just beat. I also don't think Michigan State is anywhere near a typical Michigan State team, and that was just a flat-out smash and grab at the end. That wasn't Purdue being decisively the better team from start to finish, not even close. So to suggest Purdue's arrived because it's won, you know, 2 road games in a row against pretty high-profile names, I think would be extremely, extremely premature. I think the one positive I think you took from Indiana as much as anything is after that Michigan State game, when you did so much wrong for 30 and a half minutes to the point you almost got beat and then you stole it at the end, you really wanted to see a team that was dialed in on everything it did right as opposed to what it did wrong. And that goes without saying for any basketball team, is it's important to be focused on details and whatnot. It's important to execute. But Purdue really came out and was, you know, really, really good. They executed at a really high level from an offensive perspective. They did a good enough job defensively, I think. And that's what you want to see against Penn State tomorrow or Sunday, is you want to see a team that's not going to back down from a team that's going to challenge you. When you look at the Indiana game, when Indiana's guards really started to challenge Purdue, they backed down a little bit. They turned it over a few times instead of attacking it. I think Penn State's another one of those teams like Rutgers and Illinois I've referenced a few times this season, were teams that were so competitive that they, you know, Purdue kind of folded in the face of that cutthroatedness. And I don't know if Penn State's that same way this year with a new coach and new personnel without Lamar Stevens and whatnot. But I think you want to see Purdue really compete tomorrow. You really want to see them, when they get pressured, attack it and don't back down from it. And you want to see, you want to see Travion Williams continue to play well. He's going to have a favorable matchup tomorrow for the first time in a while, because they don't have a great big guy. John Harrar is not bad, but he isn't Kofi Coburn or Miles Johnson. You want to see the freshmen continue to progress. I think those guys really showed at Indiana. They were gamers. You know, they are kind of ready for the moment. Nothing really phases them. You want to see them continue to go on a positive path. But more than anything, you just want to see Purdue be detailed and Purdue be really good in their effort and things like that. I mean, that goes without saying any game, but I think that's kind of something that should be underscored at this point.
Yeah, really. I guess, Brian, too, the ability to handle success is something that comes to my mind. Two huge wins in a row on the road. You mentioned, East Lansing, Bloomington. Yeah, those teams may not be of their usual ilk, but still name brand, I guess, commodities on the road for a still developing program like Purdue is huge. How do you handle success? How do you stay hungry now coming home to play 3 next 4 games? This is going to be a very interesting storyline for me. And you talked about the freshmen. I guess one in particular has caught everybody's eyes, Jaden Ivey. We know he was hurt earlier this year. Looks like he's rounding into form and becoming that type of player so many people thought. 13 points off the bench in that last ball game. Just I guess if you could talk about, the continued development of Ivy and what he could mean to the long-term success of Purdue's season this year.
Yeah, to your first point, I think that, one of the things you wanted to see from the Michigan State game was Purdue approach the Indiana game, not like they beat Michigan State, but that they weren't quite good enough to not almost lose to Michigan State. And I think you saw, a certain level of focus and preparedness on Purdue's part against Indiana because they were really good. I mean, they were really good in that first half against Indiana. They were up 12, as many as 12 in the first half. It probably very easily could have been double digits at the half. Indiana made a little run there in the last 30 seconds. But Purdue was really dialed in, and that's exactly what you wanted to see. And that is handling success. So if you look at it that way, Purdue's kind of passed its first test there. But now you obviously don't want to get, to use a Mike Leach term, fat and happy over the fact that, you're now kind of the celebrities in the state because you beat Indiana. Indiana might be a little bit of a different animal in that sense. To your question about Jaden Ivey, I've said this since last spring or the spring of his senior year when I saw him play in AAU. I'd be really surprised if he's not. And I tend to choose my words carefully with freshmen because I don't want to look stupid, and B, I don't want to get people's hopes up and then be wrong. But I'd be very surprised if Jaden Ivey's not a star at Purdue at some point because I think he's got it. I think he's got all of it. And I think you're starting to see it come out. He got 13 points off the bench at Indiana, but he only needed 4 shots to do that. And that's different because to this point, when he's scored, he's done it on volume. And, he's maybe not always played with veteran-like poise or control or anything like that because he's not a veteran. I mean, that goes without saying. But he made a couple of really, really good plays against their off the dribble against Indiana. He set up 2 3-pointers. 2 of his assists were on threes where he attacked off the dribble, set somebody up for a shot, but also he made threes. He got to the basket. He got to the foul line, and he did so much right in that game. He turned the ball over a few times. My story last week about his turnover free streak really jinxed him, as could have been expected. But I think he's the guy who maybe can be kind of the face of what I was talking about earlier, where when Penn State pressures them, really gets inside their jerseys, attack it. Don't back down from it. And, he's the one guy on this roster who really can go past people off the dribble. And I think that'll be important for him kind of moving forward to just be more aggressive, but be as under control as he was at Indiana. That's not an easy line to walk, especially for a freshman. Carson Edwards, left Purdue years ago, still trying to walk that fine line. Jaden Ivey that's going to be his challenge. Be aggressive, but but don't be crazy. And so far, so good. He's ahead of where I thought he'd be in that sense.
Another nuance of the game on Thursday night, I thought was a little thing, but on TV it showed up. Trey Williams and just Travion's ability to lead from his position. He actually pulled Jaden Ivey, and it might have been after a turnover. I'm not sure. And again, it's context here, and it's a little hard to tell on television, but he kind of grabbed him and led him over to the bench and talked him up, so to speak. It appeared to be a leadership role. Talk about, at least from your perspective, with Travion and what he has, how he has progressed. I kind of call him a point center in terms of a guy. He kind of directs traffic for this entire basketball team from the inside. Fair assessment? Are you seeing some of the same things?
I think something's changing in him for sure. one thing to keep in mind is when he got to Purdue, he was really young for his grade, really young. And, he's kind of dealt with some other stuff from a conditioning perspective. He was hurt in high school, all that stuff. He might just be, finally starting to grow up. And that might be natural because he was really young all along. Everybody at some point in time has that moment where things start to click for them. And, for all we know, he might be having it now. But you're starting to see little examples of leadership. I'm not in the locker room. I don't know what goes on behind the scenes necessarily. So it's hard for me to say anything for certain. But there was a timeout at the end, late in the game at Michigan State, where TV caught Matt Painter leaning out of the huddle, talking to the ref. And Travion Williams stood up out of the huddle and pulled Painter back into the huddle. I have no idea what that was about.
Yeah, I saw that. Mm-hmm. But
I thought that was fascinating. I never asked Painter about that. It's probably old news now, so I probably ought to just let that go. But also, if you listen to his post-game interviews too, and sometimes guys just say stuff just to, have something to say when they're asked a question, but he is starting to talk like a coach. He is starting to parrot Painter, and that wasn't always the case, but he's talking about Indiana. You ask him about, the importance of winning a big road game, the sort of game that a lot of players would have every reason to beat their chests. He pivots immediately to, we have to understand that going home now to finally play a home game, that doesn't really, that doesn't do it. We're not guaranteed anything. We still have to continue to be, on point with everything. And for him to just bring that up unprompted, tells me that he's really listening to Painter at this point, really listening to his coaches. And I don't know if that was always the case. There's sometimes before there was a little bit of a disconnect between what Painter would say about Travion Williams and what Travion Williams would say about Travion Williams. And now for the first time, really, they seem to be in sync with one another in terms of their messaging about his play. Painter's never going to ever publicly say, I don't think Travion Williams is, playing the best he's ever played. He's what we need him to be right now, because he is that player where he always talks about how the standard is different for players who can be great, and you hold them to that standard at all times. So he is going to always be asking for more of Travion Williams, no matter how good he is. Probably he was that way with Juwan Johnson. He was that way with Carson Edwards. He's been that way with tons of players over the years. And but it seems like the way they both talk about his play now seems much more in line with one another. I just think he seems to be hitting that moment in his career where he's just kind of maturing as a player. It might have taken him a year or two, but that's perfectly natural for a lot of people.
He's been terrific. Tom, we're going to switch gears now. Other news of the week, Mark Hagan gets hired as defensive line coach. And obviously Brian and you and me have known Mark from his days as his first stint as assistant coach at Purdue from 2000 to 2010. Let's talk about the importance of that move, but also, we're obviously still trying to put some pieces together on that defensive staff that aren't put together, at least as of Saturday afternoon. What do you see the significance of that? And then I'll come back to Brian for the same question.
Oh, yeah, I think it's a fantastic hire. I'm going to go ahead and call it a home run hire. How about that for an overstatement, guys?
Yeah.
Mark checks about every box I think you would want if you're the Purdue head coach looking for a D-line coach, right? Familiarity with the landscape in West Lafayette and the institution, having been an assistant there for 11 years, 2000 to the 2010 season. Mark's a native Hoosier. Went to Carmel, was a Greyhound, played for Bill Mallory at IU, 2 coaching stints in Bloomington as well. So knows the high school, is a terrific recruiter. Again, not just in Indiana, fellas, but also get up in the Chicago area as well. He's well connected throughout the Midwest, and he's a good coach. I mean, you ask any of his peers, and they all have a lot of respect for Mark, and he does a great job wherever he's been. So just a great addition to a Purdue defensive staff, guys, that we all know that side of the ball has a lot to prove moving forward. And Alan, you talked about the remaining vacancies on the staff on that side of the ball. We're still waiting to see what happens at defensive coordinator / linebacker coach, as well as a cornerbacks coach. Maybe the new DC is a cornerbacks coach and they just have to hire a linebackers coach. Who knows, guys, but we continue to watch, wait, and wonder to see who Brom tabs to be his third DC in 3 years. And we think the hire could be imminent, but it seems like we've been saying that for a week now. We're all staying tuned and, again, eager to see who that person is going to be pushing the buttons on the D next year.
Brian, I'll come back, but I wanted your, from a perspective of what does it say about Jeff Brom in terms of hiring a guy like Mark Hagan? Do you take anything? I mean, because he is a pass regime guy. I mean, he's available and he's a good coach. So maybe I'm not trying to read anything else into it, but do you take anything else into that hiring and what it might mean for a Jeff Brom staff?
Well, I know it'll make a lot of former players happy. I know Jeff Brom didn't have to call a lot of people for references on Mark Hagan because I know he had a lot of people bringing them in unsolicited. I think it just worked out. I think it just was a situation where all of a sudden you needed a defensive line coach. Mm-hmm. You were already engaging in conversations with Mark Hagan about, I think they at least touched base about the defensive coordinator opening. I think you got a lot of positive recommendations about him. Obviously, he knows Purdue. He knows the state. I think it just made too much sense. It was the right place at the right time for both sides. I don't think this was about bringing somebody back from Purdue's past as much as it was, here's a good coach who wants to be here, who I have positive recommendations on, who's going to hit the ground running in recruiting in Indiana and probably Chicago. And the time was right for both sides. And I think it's kind of as simple as that. It's a really good hire. It's a really good fit for both sides, I think.
Yeah, I think that's a good point. And the Mark Hagan we knew is going to bring a lot to the table. Tom, I obviously, the last question is about the not only the transfer portal, but the seniors at Purdue that some are staying, some are going. Obviously, J.D. Dellinger's decision is impactful just because, here's a guy that you've been able to trust in that position, the kicker position that you're going to have to fill. Any surprises there, and maybe what do you see? This is going to be a waiver wire, for lack of a better term, waiver wire news from now till I don't know how long, but been interesting from that perspective.
Yeah, it has. And classes at Purdue start, fellows, I think Tuesday,
right
after MLK Day. So if you're going to stick around, you're going to have to be enrolled by then, presumably, right? And as of this moment on Saturday, just a couple guys we're still waiting to get a word on if they're going to return or if they're going to go. Both defensive tackles, Lorenzo Neal and Anthony Watts. And from the tea leaves I read, I'm sort of led to believe there's a decent chance Anthony Watts could be back. And it seems like Lorenzo Neal's probably played his last snap at Purdue. I don't think that would be a big shock to anybody to see Neal leave. So, yeah, we'll find out soon there, guys. And, what, Alan, as far as surprises go, I guess nothing drastic. I thought maybe Tyler Coyle would come back, the UConn grad transfer. He only played 4 games last year in his only season at Purdue. I thought maybe he'd want to get another year under his belt. But again, otherwise, guys who have left, just to sort of recap real quick here, Derek Barnes, he's not going to use his extra year. Brennan Thieneman, Simeon Smiley, Grant Hermans, and we talked about Dellinger earlier. And coming back, again, Jackson Anthrop, Greg Long, and Samisi Fakasieki. And I think Brian and I have talked about this before. Getting Greg Long back is huge. I was mildly surprised he's coming back. I'm glad he is. I know he's dealt with injury a lot, wants to probably play a little bit more. To have him be an anchor, a right tackle next year is going to be huge. I think that line has a chance to be even better than it was last year. And Brom thought it was his best line since he's been back in West Lafayette. So a lot of positives. Don't underestimate the loss of J.D. Dellinger either. As you said, Alan, he'd been a steady force. He's a really good kid. I spoke to him at length yesterday for an exit interview, and he really dealt with a bad back. He had hurt his back going back to 2019, he told me, against Indiana. Had a cracked vertebrae. He was kicking with all last year. So you got to break in a new kicker. And as you know, guys, that can always be a very perilous situation for any team when you're breaking in a new kicker. So, again, that'll be an interesting position to watch develop.
What's pretty interesting about that position, sorry, just to interrupt real quick. What's really interesting about the decision J.D. Dellinger had to make was that him leaving opens up the job potentially for his brother. I wonder if that played into it at all. Anyway, sorry.
Favorite. Yeah, Edward Dellinger he dressed for every game last year. He's certainly going to be a contender. But, I didn't actually ask him that. I probably should have, Brian. But again, for him, it sounded like it was more of a health issue. He's already back in Charlotte, wants to start his life. Still not healthy, he told me. So, again, he's got to get healthy. But I think his football days are behind him. But again, Edward Dellinger, Chris Van Eekern, who's a kid from up near Chesterton, Indiana, who kicked off 4 times last year. He's going to be a contender. And, of course, Alan, West Lafayette's own Caleb Crockover.
Our photographer's son, right? Yep. So
that could have a shot too. So, and I talked to JD about this too. He would not be shocked if they brought somebody in as well, maybe through the portal, just to get more competition. So that's something else for readers to continue to monitor. Not just a kicker, but Brian and I also think there's a good chance we may bring in a punter too.
Going to be an interesting thing to watch, and it does make for activity in the month of January, and it's crazy to get used to that process. All right, well, we have concluded our Saturday conversation for this Saturday, and we'll look forward to a busy week on the site, obviously, with a couple basketball games. Of course, that Ohio State game been moved to Tuesday. The Boilermakers travel to Columbus. That will be a big challenge after tomorrow's game against Penn State. Then again, Friday against Michigan, who to me looks like the best team in the Big Ten, at least that I've seen. I haven't seen a ton of them, but they're really, really good. So I want to thank our sponsor. Of course, it's Purdue Union Club Hotel. We appreciate all that they do for us. And, of course, just a reminder, you can subscribe to GoldandBlack.com, 45-day free trial. All you got to do is go to the site. It's worth visiting. There are a lot of free components of our site, but our premium content, just Knucklehead Central, is worth the, I guess we'll call it worth the price of admission. We're grateful for our subscribers, too. So have a great week, everybody. Thanks so much, and be safe. And we'll look forward to talking to you next week on our Saturday or Sunday conversation.